The Supreme Court just dropped a bombshell, a unanimous 9-0 decision that's shaking the DOJ, the ATF, and every single gun owner in America. This isn't a rumor. This isn't speculation. This is a ruling that could dismantle parts of the National Firearms Act itself. In the next few minutes, we're going to break down exactly what happened, what it means for you, and why the Department of Justice is in full panic mode right now. You need to watch this until the very end, because what I'm about to reveal could change everything you thought you knew about federal gun regulations in this country. Before we dive into the chaos that's unfolding right now, let's take a step back and talk about the National Firearms Act, because if you don't understand what this law is, you won't understand why this Supreme Court decision is so earth-shattering. The National Firearms Act, or NFA as most people call it, is one of the oldest gun control laws in America. It was passed all the way back in 1934 during the height of the Prohibition era, when gangsters like Al Capone were running wild with Tommy guns. The NFA regulates specific types of firearms and accessories, things like suppressors, short-barreled rifles, short-barreled shotguns, and machine guns. It controls these items through heavy taxes, mandatory registration, and mountains of federal red tape. For decades, this law has been the DOJ and ATF's biggest enforcement tool, their go-to weapon for controlling what Americans can and cannot own when it comes to firearms. And now that weapon just got ripped out of their hands. So what triggered this Supreme Court case in the first place? How did we get to a point where the highest court in the land is unanimously slapping down the Department of Justice? It all started when a group of gun owners challenged how the ATF was applying NFA rules without Congress ever passing new laws. These weren't criminals. These were lawful gun owners who noticed something deeply troubling. The ATF was reinterpreting decades-old legislation to fit modern firearms that didn't even exist when the law was written. They argued correctly that federal agencies have absolutely no right to expand or reinterpret laws on their own. That power belongs to Congress and Congress alone. This case moved through multiple lower courts, with some judges siding with the gun owners and others backing the ATF. Eventually, the legal battle climbed all the way to the Supreme Court, and what happened next shocked everyone. In a stunning 9-0 unanimous decision, the Supreme Court ruled that the Department of Justice and the ATF had exceeded their authority under the National Firearms Act. Let me say that again, because this is critical. 9-0. Every single justice, from the most conservative to the most liberal, agreed on this. The court made it crystal clear that only Congress has the power to make or expand laws, not federal agencies. This wasn't a close call. This wasn't a split decision with dissenting opinions. This was a complete and total shutdown of executive overreach. When you see a unanimous decision like this, you know something went very, very wrong at the agency level. So, what exactly did the DOJ get wrong? Here's where it gets really interesting. The Department of Justice had been arguing for years that modern firearms, particularly things like pistol braces and certain modified rifles, should fall under the regulatory umbrella of the NFA, even though Congress never explicitly said that. They tried to stretch the definition of regulated firearms to include items that were clearly not covered by the original 1934 law. The Supreme Court absolutely slammed this reasoning, calling it an unconstitutional power grab. The justices made it clear that the DOJ cannot simply reinterpret old laws to fit their current political goals or enforcement priorities. Translation: if you want to regulate something new, you need to go to Congress and get a new law passed. You can't just decide on your own that a piece of equipment suddenly falls under an 80-year-old statute. Now, let's talk about what this means for the ATF, because they are in serious trouble right now. This Supreme Court decision doesn't just embarrass the agency. It potentially invalidates years of enforcement actions. Everything from recent pistol brace bans to NFA tax rules could now face immediate legal challenges, and the ATF knows it. For many gun owners who have been fighting against what they see as bureaucratic tyranny, this is a long-awaited victory. The ATF has operated for years under the assumption that they could interpret and reinterpret gun laws however they wanted, as long as they claimed it was in the interest of public safety. That era just came to a screeching halt. Internal sources suggest that ATF officials are scrambling to figure out which of their current regulations might be legally vulnerable after this ruling, and the answer appears to be a lot of them. What does this mean for you, the everyday gun owner? This could potentially mean the rollback of NFA-related taxes and registration requirements for millions of lawful gun owners across America. If the court's language is applied broadly in future cases, and many legal experts believe it will be, we could even see existing restrictions undone. Imagine not having to pay a $200 tax stamp for a suppressor. Imagine not having to wait months for ATF approval just to exercise your Second Amendment rights. These aren't far-fetched fantasies anymore. These are real possibilities that legal scholars are actively discussing right now. The implications are massive, and they extend far beyond just one case or one regulation. The DOJ's reaction has been nothing short of chaotic. Within hours of the Supreme Court's ruling, the Department of Justice went into damage control mode. Internal memos obtained by legal watchdog groups suggest that officials are scrambling to develop emergency guidance for how to enforce current laws without violating the court's explicit order. But here's the problem. When you have a unanimous Supreme Court decision, there's not much wiggle room. You can't just ignore it. You can't reinterpret it. The court's language was direct, forceful, and left no room for the kind of legal gymnastics the DOJ is famous for. Sources inside the department say that some officials are privately furious, while others are genuinely concerned about what this means for federal law enforcement authority in general, not just in the gun rights arena. The political response has been predictably explosive. Gun rights advocates are celebrating this as the biggest Second Amendment victory since the landmark Heller decision in 2008. Organizations like the Firearms Policy Coalition and Gun Owners of America are calling this a watershed moment, a turning point in the fight against executive overreach. On the flip side, gun control groups are absolutely furious. They're warning that this decision could dismantle decades of what they call safety regulation. Some are already calling on Congress to pass emergency legislation to restore the ATF's enforcement powers. Meanwhile, several state governors, particularly in blue states like California, New York, and Illinois, are vowing to find workarounds, promising to tighten their own state-level restrictions in response to what they see as a dangerous federal rollback. Constitutional law experts are weighing in, and their analysis adds even more weight to how significant this ruling really is. Legal scholars across the political spectrum say that the court's language was unusually direct and forceful, signaling that the justices are done tolerating agency overreach, not just from the ATF, but potentially from all federal agencies. One prominent constitutional analyst noted that this case marks the end of the ATF's unchecked authority to expand gun regulations without congressional approval. Experts warn that this decision will reshape how all firearm laws are interpreted moving forward, and it could set precedents that extend far beyond the Second Amendment into other areas of administrative law. When the Supreme Court speaks this clearly and this unanimously, lower courts pay attention, and federal agencies think twice before pushing the boundaries of their authority. So what happens next? What are the possible next steps in this legal and political drama? The DOJ could theoretically request clarification from the court or push Congress to pass new legislation that explicitly grants them the authority they've been claiming to have. But the chances of Congress acting quickly on anything, especially something as politically divisive as gun control, are slim to none. In the meantime, thousands of ongoing ATF enforcement cases could be frozen or potentially overturned. Defense attorneys in gun-related prosecutions are already filing motions to dismiss based on this ruling, and judges are going to have to grapple with how broadly to apply the Supreme Court's language. We're looking at a cascade effect that could take months or even years to fully play out through the federal court system. Don't think for a second that the states are going to sit quietly during all of this. States like California, New York, New Jersey, and Illinois have already indicated they may try to tighten their own restrictions in response to this federal ruling. But here's the catch. Even those state-level restrictions could now be challenged using this Supreme Court decision as precedent. The legal argument would be that if federal agencies can't expand gun laws without congressional authority, then state agencies shouldn't be able to either without explicit legislative approval. This sets up a nationwide legal tug-of-war between state law and constitutional rights, and it's going to play out in courtrooms from coast to coast over the next several years. Let's put this in historical context because this ruling is genuinely huge. It's extremely rare to see a 9-0 unanimous decision on anything, especially on a topic as politically charged as gun control. That alone tells you how far the Department of Justice had gone. Even justices who are typically sympathetic to government authority and regulatory power couldn't stomach what the DOJ was doing. This ruling doesn't just change gun law, it redefines the limits of government power in America. It's a stark reminder that in our constitutional system, agencies don't make laws. Congress makes laws. Agencies enforce them, but only within the bounds that Congress explicitly sets. This case is going to be taught in law schools for decades as a textbook example of why the separation of powers matters and what happens when executive agencies forget their place. So what should you, as a gun owner or someone who cares about constitutional rights, do right now? First, stay informed. This decision could immediately affect how you register, transport, modify, or even purchase certain firearms and accessories. Don't make any major decisions based solely on social media posts or rumors. Wait for official guidance from reputable legal sources and attorneys who specialize in firearms law. Second, understand that while this is a massive victory, the fight isn't over. Pro-gun control politicians and advocacy groups are already mobilizing to push for new legislation that would restore or expand federal regulatory power. Knowledge is your best defense in this rapidly changing legal landscape because the rules are literally being rewritten as we speak. So let's recap everything we just covered because this is too important to miss. The Supreme Court just dropped a 9-0 unanimous bombshell that severely crippled the Department of Justice's authority under the National Firearms Act. The court ruled that federal agencies cannot expand or reinterpret laws without explicit congressional authority, effectively stripping the ATF of its ability to regulate firearms through administrative fiat. This decision could reshape every major gun rights case in America, potentially rolling back decades of regulations and enforcement actions. The DOJ is scrambling, the ATF is in crisis mode, and gun owners across the country are watching closely to see what happens next. If you want to stay ahead of these rulings and understand exactly how they affect your rights, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think about this decision. Are you celebrating or are you concerned about what comes next? Share this video with every gun owner you know because history is literally being written right now and most people have no idea it's even happening. In the next episode, we're going to dive deep into what this decision specifically means for suppressor bans, pistol brace rules, and other hot-button NFA issues that could be challenged in court within the next few months. You don't want to miss that. Until then, stay informed, stay vigilant, and remember, your rights are only as strong as your willingness to defend them.